a big lover of bad jokes. It's,
Do you know a
it is
joke?
what it is. I'm going to tell a couple of jokes,
Okay.
if that's okay. I'm now a father of a 4-year-old, and so I feel very justified in being a lover of bad jokes now. They're all dad jokes. So I wrote a few of them into the book, and I'm going to tell a few of them. So my favorite one is this. What is this? It's a flock of these. It's good, right? When they're physical, they're the best. My daughter's favorite one in the book is Where Do Pigs Park? The parking lot. So, there are jokes in the book, although I feel like people don't seem to think it's funny. I find a lot of the book funny, but nobody ever says it's funny. But when I was in Prague, I was kind of collecting myths and superstitions. I was an English teacher there for a year in 2004, and it meant that I could just kind of wander around and have one-on-one conversations with people in their 30s and in pretty high-level positions who just wanted to talk about whatever and have me fix their English. So since it was up for me, like what I wanted to talk about, I asked them to tell me the myths of Prague. And I collected these, and they got into the book in kind of a similar way to the jokes, I think. I'm going to read from, the book is called The 100-Year Flood. I'm going to read from the first few pages, which are kind of some of the myths that I learned, and then from a little bit farther in. Before his father came and flew him back to Massachusetts General Hospital in September of 2002, these are the things he learned in Prague. 1, if someone sneezes while you're talking, what you're saying is true. These are the things I learned in Prague. 2, if your nose is soft, you're lying. 3, if you cut an apple in half and see a star, it's good luck. If not, it's bad. 4, if you step in shit, it's good luck. 5, if you pour molten lead into water, you can tell the future from the form it makes. 6, if your hand itches, you'll get into a fight. 7, if your nose itches, you'll get beaten up. 8, if you pour something and it overflows, someone you know will get pregnant. 9, if you lift your feet for someone to sweep under them, you'll never marry. 10, to cry at the wrong grave means to bark up the wrong tree. 11, often the legends of Prague have to do with selling one's soul to the devil. 12, half of Prague will be destroyed by fire, half by water. And 13, when the Czech Republic is in its most desperate hour of need, a sleeping army under the hill Blanik will awaken and defeat its enemies. T wrote this list during his first week in the hospital. He woke on a wet pillow, and he scrambled over the railing of the bed and fell to the floor. He pinched his nose shut. Water rushed over him, thick and brown, but he could breathe. He stood and rested the back of his hand on his pillow. He had cried in his sleep again. He smoothed down his dry hospital gown and went to the window. The river outside was the Charles in Boston, not the Vltava in Prague. He pressed a sheet of paper against the glass, blocking the view, and wrote until the words blurred. When a doctor knocked at the door, he touched the bandage around his head and told himself there was no flood. He was in Boston. The doctor switched on the x-ray board, and they stared at the back of T's skull. Where T had been hit, the nerves had fused together in shock, and the skin had knotted and died until a surgeon had to cut it off. T knew who had attacked him, probably. a Czech with an American name, someone he had called friend. T couldn't remember what exactly had happened. The impact had caused some rare brain damage. He couldn't tell dates or remember song lyrics. "Are you listening?" the doctor asked. T stood on one leg, and the doctor tested his balance. The solidity of the floor shifted like weather. For the second time that day, T was back in Prague. He was running, naked, under the fireworks on New Year's Eve, the wind slapping his chest. People pushed and sang and embraced. Then the back of a glowing leg slipped through the crowd. A woman walked out of T's hospital room, but no one had been inside except the doctor and T. T started forward and his balance gave out. The doctor held him up, linking arms, and called for a nurse. The doctor said T had to want to recover. T had seen that leg, that calf, before. Where? Later that month, T would transfer to a rehabilitation center meant to reorient him to the world he'd never understood. He would stumble down the halls searching for a ghost. He took to stopping other patients and prompting them with abstract nouns. They had to get used to every kind of bewilderment. "Love," he would say, hands trembling, and someone willing might answer, "What goes up comes down." Or, "If you give a mouse a cookie." "Regret," he would say, and someone might answer, "A wish for a perfect life." Or, "Aging." "Hate," he would say, and some would remember why they were there. In August, in Prague, the flood would seem a surprise, though the storms came and went for weeks beforehand. Police and firefighters raised steel barriers along the embankments in Old Town, but left the Karlin district unprotected. On the news, a former construction worker warned that the buildings in Karlin could collapse, built too quickly, with unfired bricks. An analyst predicted deaths and lawsuits. The city surrendered its boundaries. Citizens defended museums and places of worship with sandbags. In the rain, an evacuation was ordered, but people thronged to bridges and riverbanks to watch. Sections of sidewalk buckled like tiny tectonic plates. Trees tipped over in the oversaturated soil and had to be tethered like barges. Metro lines were shut down too late to protect them. The river washed parts of other cities into Prague. The river pulled down levees, then buildings. The river washed parts of Prague into other parts of Prague, then into the rest of Europe. From where T watched, in his second-floor apartment, the flood made a high brown sea just below his window. He smelled the sewage in the water. He wondered how he had let himself miss the signs. How strange the way we wade into disaster, step after step, not realizing how far we've gone until we're drowning. Just before the flood, Kaka had asked about Korea as the raindrops formed fat planets against the window pane. Her finger followed the streaks across the glass. "A Korean friend told me once about his visits as a kid," she said. "Everyone looked like him, but he still didn't belong." Kaka touched her temple where her skin met her hair. "No one your age," she said, "feels like he belongs." How did she really see him? His quick black eyes, the scar on his chin that toughened his boyishness, his flat cheeks and curved nose, the cream in his brown skin that seemed to make white people touch him without realizing. He was a believer, as Pablo Picasso had painted. In college, he had listed ambitions: get a girlfriend, be a writer, drink more water, fall in love. He had believed in the kind of weight that could drag whatever fluttered in his throat down to more comfortable depths, a someplace or someone. Kaka smoothed her hair and he said, "You don't know what it's like to be adopted. People see you as who you were at birth, but you're not that person." At that point, the flood was still weeks off. He opened the window and caught rain in the cup of his palm. Katka pulled his hand in, and for a moment he thought for some reason that she would lower her lips to the water and drink. She splashed his face. He pulled back in anger, but her grin conquered him. So I started the book when I was a year out of college, and I finished it last year. So it's 10 years. I guess you probably know how old I am now. That's sad. And when I started it, I was pretending at least that I wasn't thinking about adoption at all. And so I was living in Prague, kind of just doing this thing, thinking that adoption had no role in my life. And then the year after, kind of a strange thing, I thought, maybe I'll just go to Korea. And, they let you teach English there. And they pay you pretty well. And I'll just check it out, see what it's like. And so I went to Korea, and I remember on the plane, I tried to learn the language, and I learned how to read the language. Wow. And I can still read the language, but I have no idea what it means.
13 hours, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's a long plane ride. You can, it's an alphabet, so you can learn 20-something letters in 13 hours. It's not that bad.
Speak for yourself.
Well, I don't know what any of it means still.
With soju.
Yeah. And that was soju. Yeah. I didn't know what soju was. At that time, I'd never seen a Korean movie, never had Korean food, never heard a Korean song, nothing. I barely knew Korea existed. I mean, it just seemed like it was a myth to me. It was just a myth. And I remember on the plane thinking, when I touched down, because I was adopted when I was 2.5, I smell the air, feel the ground, hear the language, and it'll come back to me. And I'll just remember those first 2.5 years of my life, or at least something, right? Nothing happened. Yeah. Nothing happened. It's very, what happened was actually the exact opposite of that. I felt like a stranger there in a similar but different way than I felt here. Where here I always was singled out I grew up in a very white town, like 99% white. And I was always singled out for being, Asian. And in Korea, I was singled out for being American. As soon as I opened my mouth, I wasn't Korean. And it really made me realize that I didn't have a place that I belonged to. And so I was kind of forced into starting to think about it then. That was the first time I started to write fiction with Asian characters or main protagonists. And adoption kind of snuck in that way. And it wasn't until I had a kid 4 years ago, that it really came to the surface. And I was able to kind of work that into my life and writing. And it still took me 4 years after that really to figure out that this book was so much about adoption. It was in the very final rounds of edits.